Scarred is a Singaporean indie horror game, and it gave me some relatively new things to think about. So today I'm going to talk about those things, and these are things that I just haven't had the opportunity to discuss on this channel yet. Now, the game itself has quite a few issues. I'm not going to lie, it's not really that scary, but it is a different kind of horror. It's the kind of horror that wears a school uniform, the kind that smiles at the teachers, aces every test, and walks through life untouched while destroying everyone around them. I'm talking about Calvin, a model student, a privileged kid, and a monster. In this video, we're not here to feel sorry for him, we're here to understand how someone like him is made and why the system protects him at every step. Because Calvin isn't some cartoon villain. He is the byproduct of two things: the pressure to be the perfect Asian student and the power that comes from money, influence, and immunity. It's a combination that doesn't just breed cruelty, it rewards it. And in psychology, we call this a few things: entitlement syndrome, maladaptive perfectionism, and most importantly, empathy erosion through power. When somebody is praised for success but never taught to be human, you get people like Calvin. If you like this content, be sure to like the video to receive an A, but if you dislike the video, you still get an A, because all engagement is engagement. And welcome to the psychology of Scarred. So before we go deeper into the psychology, let's do a little story explainer so that everybody's on the same page. We're going to talk about what actually happens in Scarred and how Calvin's actions shattered the lives of essentially two people who were just minding their own business. Because at the center of Scarred are two childhood friends, Olivia and Alan. They grew up in broken homes, they had nothing but each other's friendship and their dreams. Alan wanted to go pro in basketball, and Olivia dreamed of opening her own hair salon. But one mistake would burn those dreams to the ground, literally. One day, Alan gave Olivia a lantern. She was just a kid, and she didn't know how dangerous it was going to be for her to light it near the stove. And we're gonna blame her parents for that, because they never taught her to not play with the stove. It's honestly on the adults here. The fire that followed killed her grandparents who were sleeping in the bedroom, and it left Olivia's body permanently seared and scarred. Alan had no idea that any of this happened, and after the tragedy, they drifted apart until years later when they found each other again in high school. And this is where Calvin comes in, because Calvin would see their happiness and decide to destroy it. Part of me thinks it was jealousy. Maybe it was just because he could. Whatever it was, it started with bullying, targeting Alan, ridiculing Olivia. However, it would get darker, because Calvin would sneak into the girls' showers and secretly record Olivia. Not just naked, but vulnerable, ashamed of her scarred body. A body that was a reminder to her that her actions caused her grandparents' deaths. And Calvin knew exactly what he was doing, but then he would begin to blackmail her with the footage, forcing her to do things that she didn't want to do. So she finally asks Alan for help, and he did what any friend would. He helped his friend. He deleted the video, but it didn't matter. Calvin had already leaked it anyway. And as a result, Olivia was shattered. Her private trauma was turned into public humiliation. But because it happened seemingly right after she asked Alan to delete the video, she started to speculate that Alan might have betrayed her. Regardless, she believed the whole world saw her not as a survivor, but as a disgusting monster who killed her grandparents. But you see, the worst thing about all of this is that Calvin faced zero consequences. He was a top student, and he was from an affluent family. He didn't get expelled, he got a stern talking to, a slap on the wrist, and that's it. So Olivia, devastated into just complete despair and depression, disappeared soon after. But she didn't run away. What she did was jump down an elevator shaft. No longer wanting to suffer, she decided to end it all. But because she didn't tell anybody and nobody saw her, her death was ruled as a missing persons case. However, her diary told the rest of the story. Her pain, her doubts about Alan, the hell that Calvin put her through, and her father found that diary. And so his grief turned into vengeance. he blamed the boys. Consequently, he captured and tied them up with intent to burn them alive. But you see, even with this, Olivia's pain and dark thoughts lingered long after her death. It would fester into a dark spirit, a cursed one, that would haunt Alan and Calvin. For Alan, he's confused because he really didn't do anything, and it took a while to convince Olivia's corrupted spirit of this. In one ending, she doesn't believe him, so Alan ends up getting the curly from mouthwashing treatment. But in the good ending, he apologizes for the pain that she went through. Even though it wasn't his fault, he asks for forgiveness. And with this, Olivia is able to move on. And then Alan wakes up from this dream that he's in, stands up to Calvin, and justice is served. But here is the main thing that made me even want to do this video. What is it about Calvin that turned him into this terrorizing bully? I think it all starts with him being Asian. The Asian stereotype. The typical Asian stereotype. Because in many Asian cultures, especially, I just realized how that sounded. He's Asian, so that's not what I meant. But in many Asian cultures, especially in places like Singapore where Scarred is set, academic achievement isn't just a personal goal. It is survival, it is purpose, it's honor, identity. From the moment that a child can hold a pencil, they're taught that grades define not just their future, but their worth. To their families, to their schools, to society at large, because you have to remember that Asian culture is very different than Western culture. For an example, with Americans, it's very all for one, but in Asian culture, it's one for all. It's this mentality that one of us goes up and we all come up. And that's also why in Asian culture, it's expected innately that you just take care of your parents when they get old, instead of putting them in a retirement home. But the key to ensuring that all of this happens stems from making sure that you are a top mark student. Anything less is a shame that stains not just the child, but everybody connected to them. You don't want to bring dishonor to your family. Now, some of you guys might think I'm joking about this, but it's a stereotype for a reason. And personally, I saw this growing up. But don't just take my word for it. Psychological research backs this up. Studies like Ong and Huan's 2006 work on Singaporean adolescents shows that high academic expectations are directly linked to things like increased anxiety, depression, and emotional suppression. Another study found by Chang in 1996 found that many Asian students internalize failure not as a mistake, but as a deep moral flaw, something that makes them unworthy of love or respect. There are obviously a lot of flaws with this, and I do have a personal beef with the education system because I feel like a lot of things could be done better so that the children of our future would benefit. But this is the world that the game is set in and the reality of many people even today. And Calvin lived under those rules. His family demanded excellence, his school validated it, and his entire social world praised his ability to succeed, and only his ability to succeed. When you grow up like that, you don't just fear failure, you fear becoming nothing. The game even starts out with showcasing how stressed Calvin was having to be this stellar student. Again, we're not trying to excuse the messed up stuff that he did, we're just trying to understand more about the world that made his persona. This kind of psychological environment breeds what is defined as maladaptive perfectionism. It isn't the healthy drive to improve, it is the destructive belief that anything less than flawless is worthless. People trapped in this mindset live in constant fear of falling short or being wrong, making a mistake, fear of being exposed as inadequate, fear of losing everything if they show a single crack. And Calvin was cracking long before anyone had noticed. He wasn't allowed to express doubt. For Asian families, things like stress or even mental illness are ignored, and you are told by your parents to build a bridge and get over it, to suck it up. He wasn't allowed to show weakness. All he could do was perform. A high-scoring model student, even as the pressure hollowed him out from the inside. His entire self-worth was conditional, tied to grades, trophies, achievements. And the more he succeeded, the less he knew who he really was beneath all of those accolades. He would even turn to smoking, as a way to take the edge off. But in case you're wondering, no, not every Asian is the typical model A student, but it's an archetype, again, for a reason. And so by the time that Calvin started targeting Alan and Olivia, the seeds had already been planted. His cruelty didn't come from sudden hatred, it came from years of learned emotional suppression, masked insecurity, and unbearable pressure. On the surface, Calvin was everything society claimed to value, but beneath that surface was something rotten, and it had been festering for a long time. You see, Calvin didn't just need to succeed, he needed others to fail. He didn't just get a kick out of seeing Olivia and Alan miserable, he couldn't stand ever seeing them happy. Their smiles, their small moments of peace, felt like personal attacks against him. And in psychology, there's a name for this: malicious envy. This is the emotion you feel not when you want what someone else has, but when you want them to lose it. It isn't admiration, it is resentment. And narcissists often exhibit these behaviors, where they sabotage others to tear them down. I've seen quite a few parents do this to their own kids. It fuels a quiet, bitter kind of cruelty, one that builds and stacks upon itself over and over again until it crushes. And that is exactly why Calvin didn't just tease Alan or ignore Olivia. He obliterated them piece by piece. He recorded Olivia's most private, vulnerable moments. He blackmailed her, leaked her trauma to the world. With Alan, he would belittle him, make fun of his dream, even throw basketballs at his face to make him bleed. He did this with purpose because deep down, their happiness made him feel small, and he could not tolerate that. But malicious envy wasn't the only thing driving him, because Calvin has what is known as a position of privilege. His wealth, his academic accolades, his family's influence gave him something more dangerous: entitlement. Research has shown that power makes people feel entitled to break moral rules without guilt. It makes them more hypocritical. It severs empathy. It convinces people that consequences are for others, not for them, that they are above the law, that only normal people, poor people, get in trouble. Calvin lived in that illusion. He didn't fear punishment. He didn't even feel guilt. Psychologists Paulus and Williams called this combination of traits the dark triad: narcissism, which is the need for admiration and superiority; Machiavellianism, which is the manipulation and exploitation of others; and psychopathy, which is the lack of empathy and remorse. It's also worth understanding a difference here, because I see a lot of people actually mix up psychopathy and sociopathy. They're often used interchangeably, but they're not exactly the same. A psychopath tends to be born with emotional deficits, somebody who can fake charm but feel little real empathy inside. A sociopath, on the other hand, is shaped more by environment, by trauma, pressure, or abuse that twists how they see others. If anything, Calvin leans closer to being a sociopath. He wasn't born empty. He was made this way through years of perfectionism, privilege, emotional suppression, and the silent lesson that success matters more than humanity. And it is completely inhumane, everything that Calvin does. And the reality is that there are people all around the world, kids in school, high school, who suffer through this, even beyond high school. Calvin wasn't punished for recording a girl in the showers, not expelled for blackmailing her. He wasn't dragged out in handcuffs for leaking footage of her most private shame. There was no justice for causing her suicide. He faced nothing but a slap on the wrist. Because Calvin wasn't just a boy, he was a name, a family, a future too important for the system to touch. This is how monsters survive and thrive in our very day and age. Psychologist Albert Bandura called this process moral disengagement. In his 1999 theory, Bandura explained that people don't see themselves as bad even when they commit terrible acts. They distance themselves from the consequences. They rationalize them. They blame the victim. And most dangerously, they're allowed to do it when the world around them turns a blind eye. When you are a bystander and you allow these things, these horrible things to happen, you are just as guilty. Calvin's teachers, his school admins, maybe even his parents, they didn't want to see what he really was. They refused to see it because he had perfect grades, a bright future, and he looked like success. And when success is all that matters, morality becomes optional. The system didn't just ignore what Calvin did, it enabled it, thereby encouraging it. In the real world, people who do this teach and support these kids' bad behaviors by essentially encouraging and supporting this idea that there are no consequences for them, so they have free reign to do as they please. Calvin learned something far worse than how to hurt people. He learned how to get away with murder, how to violate, abuse, exploit, blackmail, and abuse women. He learned that cruelty, when wrapped in excellence, could hide in plain sight. That's why the real horror of Scarred isn't just Olivia's death and her turning into an entity. It's the chilling, quiet truth that Calvin was never alone in what he did. He was built, forged, and protected by an entire world that valued perfection more than people. But Calvin isn't unique. He's a symbol, a reflection of a fear that sits quietly in the back of every classroom, every office, every place where success is worshipped more than human decency. And we have all seen people like him before. The people at the top looking down at us. The ones who seem untouchable, not because they're good people, but because they're good at looking good. And they have all the money and the status and the power to prove it. In media, these characters show up again and again. The elite bully, the golden child with blood on their hands. We see these in movies and TV shows because deep down we know they exist in real life. We know the system's built to reward excellence and often forget to reward kindness. We know that brutality, if dressed well enough, can be mistaken for strength. Psychologically, Calvin embodies what is sometimes called golden child syndrome. It's not a clinical term, but it is a term that embodies when a child becomes the pride of their family or institution, and any flaw, any cruelty, any crack in the image is just ignored, downplayed, denied. Because admitting that it was actually there would shatter the illusion of perfection. And you hear it all the time. Oh, my child is so perfect. He's an angel, she's an angel. My baby could never do anything wrong. And that's the real horror that Scarred leaves us with. Not just that monsters exist, but that we create them. In the same way that Jimmy from Mouthwashing was created. Click that video to see why I became a full-time YouTuber instead of having coworkers. Also, if you're still here, let me know what sport you played in high school, if you did at all.